Hey guys, Phylaris here. So, patch 13.5 came out yesterday, and I've played maybe 20 games on the patch so far testing out the jungle changes. And I wanted to record a quick video talking about them, because some of the changes have really obvious ramifications, but some of them not so much. There are actually a couple things on the patch that are quite misleading, and they're very impactful actually. So to start off with the champion changes, not a whole lot of junglers on here. Rammus got a small nerf, Pantheon got a nice jungle buff. His Q cooldown went from 13 to 11 seconds early. This is his primary clearing ability, so his clearing is much better in the early game now. He's still not like some speed clearer power farmer, but it's very serviceable, and he has powerful ganks, great snowballing, so I think this champion is a fully viable jungler by this point. Next big change, plated steel caps. This is a substantial nerf for several AD junglers, primarily Bel'Veth and Warwick. This was the most overpurchased item in the game, the most misleading item in the game. There were so many instances of damage where you would think plated steel caps would work, where it just didn't. Ezreal Q, Nasus Q, Bel'Veth E, all of these are effects where like you would think it would work, but it didn't do anything. Right? Now this has been fixed. There's so many new skills that are affected by plated steel caps damage. Bel'Veth in particular gets hit really hard. Her Q and her E are now affected by the 12% damage reduction. Bel'Veth, like plated steel caps was such a bait purchase into Bel'Veth previously because her Q damage wasn't affected, her E damage wasn't affected, her Kraken damage wasn't affected, her Bork damage wasn't affected. Now of course the on-hit damage still not affected, alright? On-hit damage does not count as basic attack damage, but the only thing that it worked into was her base auto attacks, and that was really, really misleading. I would rather just have a pair of CDR boots into her on a lot of champions. Ezreal, Nasus, right? All of these now affected by plated steel caps. So really, really nice buff to the item. Nerf to quite a few AD junglers. Again, Warwick and Bel'Veth the hardest hit, but Trundle, Shyvana Q, Wukong Q, Hecarim E, all of these champions get a small nerf from this change. Next, we have the big jungle adjustments. Let's talk about the most obvious one first, jungle camp gold. Every single camp has gotten about 10 gold. So this is the most clear change. It just rebalances things slightly in favor of farm junglers because gank junglers have been strong the entire season. How much gold did we get exactly? Every camp is worth 4 CS, so 4 CS 10 gold, 40 CS 100 gold, 120 CS 300 gold, right? I would wager most farm junglers have a 120 CS by say 15, 16 minutes, so it's an extra kill's worth of gold by that point. It's not like, whoa, but it's definitely noticeable and it helps you reach your item spikes a little bit faster. So this is great for the farming carry junglers. It's still less gold than we had in Season 12, but it's not that big of a gap anymore. Next, we have the nerf to sweeping lens. Its ability power cooldown is going up from 90 to 60 to 120 to 60 by level. So this is coming right after Yellow Trinket was buffed. Yellow Trinket's cooldown has gone down in the early game, so this means that you're not really going to be able to keep up with the pace that laners are warding now. And this is, again, another nerf targeted at gank junglers. I've actually found that, especially on the more passive or neutral junglers, I kind of prefer sitting on Yellow Trinket for a while now. I don't like swapping over to Sweeping Lens, like, immediately at the start of the game. What a lot of junglers have done for years now is they just go drop a ward level 1 and swap for their sweeper. I actually kind of prefer sitting on Yellow Trinket, to be honest. At least until, like, my first or second recall. On gankers, first recall. On farmers, sometimes the second, even third recall. Just because the rebalance of the cooldowns has made it so I just feel like I get a little bit more impact from Yellow Trinket in a lot of my games in the earlier stages. You do want to swap to Sweeper eventually if you're not playing something like Lee Sin that just wants yellow for ward hops, of course. Because you just need Sweeper as a jungler by some point, right? You need it to do objectives, you need to clear out vision. The enemy team starts warding deeper and deeper as the game progresses, and if you're spotted in your jungle, you're spotted in river coming in for a gank, either the gank's not going to work, or it's going to look like it works, but that's because the enemy jungler's just sitting in a bush waiting for you to counter gank because they saw you like 10 seconds ago, right? So you really do need to swap for Sweeper eventually. It's just that if you're not playing like a raw gank jungler, I think it's actually okay to sit on Yellow Trinket for a while now. It feels pretty decent. Next, jungle lane experience. This is probably the most misleading change on these patch notes. If you're just reading this, you're probably gonna misunderstand, okay? The way it worked previously was you had a permanent 25% penalty on your experience from minions. This lasted the entire game, unless you were really, really underleveled. Okay, so basically it just lasted the entire game, which is not what it would have said. It's not what it said on previous patch notes, but that's how it worked. Now, it scales from a 60% penalty down to the previous 25% penalty by 14 minutes, and then it disappears. Okay? You probably won't get this from reading this. It disappears after 14 minutes. You get full EXP past that point. So this is really nice for all junglers, really, but especially the carry junglers that like to split waves in like mid-game, late-game sometimes, like Master Yi, Graves, Talon. You're no longer going to get that permanent penalty. This is so good. Now, of course, the early penalty is very severe. This is another nerf targeted at early gankers. Do note that it starts from 0 minutes, so by the time you actually gank, it's not a 60% penalty, it'll be more like 50%, something like that, maybe a little bit heavier. That's still significant, though, right? So what I've found is after you gank, when you're normally helping your laner push out their wave and reset it, I kind of prefer just chunking the wave and leaving now. Like, I'll tag it with some wave clear and then just dip and go for my next camp or go for my next gank or go for Scuttle Crab. And I'll just leave the full EXP to my laner because it's just so inefficient for me to soak any of that experience. Now, of course, if you have to be there the whole time on the wave, helping them push in order to get it into the tower in time before the next wave arrives, go ahead and still do that, right? That's better than having a bad wave state for your laner. It's not bad for you to get the experience. It's just that it's a little bit more efficient if you can give it over to your laner and move on for something else. And as the game goes on, you can play more standard, and past 14 minutes, laners and junglers are on even footing with this again. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of comments asking for my sources on the EXP penalty going away past 14 minutes because it's contrary to what's stated in the patch notes. It's also different from what Freak said in his patch rundown and his charts. And this is not a knock on Freak whatsoever. I love his content. It's just that I think he was going off of the patch notes when he made the charts, and the patch notes are really, really unclear. Yes, I can confirm it does go away after 14 minutes. You have 100% EXP past that point. I've played many games on the patch, and I was looking for this specifically when I was looking at the EXP numbers. And this is not bugged. It's intended. I was talking with Phlox like a couple weeks ago before these changes shipped, and he confirmed, yes, it's supposed to go away after 14 minutes. And now for the final big jungle change of the patch, counter jungling is back, thank God. Previously, we had a 20% damage buff versus our own jungle camps. Now, this applies to the enemy jungle camps as well, so you'll clear them at the same speed. Counter jungling was always the main check and balance against gank junglers. A jungler would skip camps to go gank, and then as a farm jungler, you could take away his camps and accelerate yourself as compensation. But because it took so long to take the camps, they were so damn tanky, and you took so much damage doing so, that in the early game, it just wasn't worth it in most cases anymore. You'd be farming your jungle, you see the enemy jungler gank, and you're just like, oh cool, I'm gonna finish off my full clear, right? It just wasn't worth the time to run into their jungle, because if you tried, let's say the enemy jungler did something like, say, Red Krugs Raptors into bot gank, you started on your blue, and you went like this, you're on your Raptors, you see him gank bot, so you want to go take his stuff. You could only take away like one camp before he recalled and arrived and pushed you off the second camp, and now he got a gank off, he got a free recall, he's full HP with items, maybe he can even invade you, right? And you'd get plastered. So it just wasn't really worth it, especially because double camp was removed and you couldn't do blue and Gromp at the same time. Now it feels much, much better. You're going to be able to take away the blue and the Gromp, you're going to be able to take away the Raptors and the red, and it feels like appropriate compensation for the enemy skipping camps to go gank. So it's back to its Season 12 state. It feels really nice. I think that farm junglers benefit a lot from this. Invade junglers like Nidalee and Graves benefit a lot from this. As a gank jungler, the main thing you have to be aware of is you can still same side gank. You can still gank on your starting side like this or like this, but the repercussions are going to be heavier. You should expect to lose a couple camps on the opposite side in most cases if you do this again, just like Season 12. It doesn't mean you can't go for a starting side gank. They're still quite unexpected for the laners because typical like pathing logic dictates you go in one direction, right? So you can still go for them if you know it's going to work, the lane is volatile, and you have a strong carry here. You also want to be aware of where the enemy jungler is starting. Because if the enemy jungler is starting on the opposite side of the map, it's much better to go for a single side gank than if they're starting on the same side of the map. If they're on opposite sides and they're pathing like this, and you path like this, right? And then you go for a gank here, most of the time they're already on their wolf camp by the time you're going for this gank, right? Because it takes you time to walk over, so it's too late for them to go punish on the other side. Even if they realized it because they had some vision, and they go like this to take your top side, then after the gank, you can now go into their bot side because you also don't have the debuff anymore and you just vertical split, right? And you got the gank off. So when the enemy jungler starting on the opposite side, it's still generally speaking not a bad idea to look for the starting side ganks if it looks opportune. But if they're starting on the same side as you, now it's really, really dicey because if you do something like this, then by the time you show up for the bot gank, they're going to be on the Raptors. They see you after Raps, they go take your blue Gromp, right? And then they go back for the Crab, then they go back for their top side, and they have a really, really accelerated opening. And if this gank didn't work out for you, oh man, it's going to suck. Even if it worked, it's not as good as it was before because you don't get as much EXP off of these minions after pushing afterwards, right? So be very, very careful going for these ganks if you're starting on the same side as the enemy jungler in particular. Again, doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's the expected value is lower, so be careful. It's like Season 12 again. That's about it for the jungle changes this patch. I hope you guys learned something. I hope that you can head into the patch having a good grasp on what actually changed and what to expect. If you liked the video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters for helping to make this channel possible.